I moved to the edge of Oak Ridge Estates for peace. That's all I wanted: quiet land, a clear view of the tree-lined hills, and space to work on my classic motorcycles without some committee scrutinizing the color of my garage door. My name's Mason Dawson, and I own 5 acres of land just past the boundary line of one of the most controlling HOAs in the state. According to every legal document I've read, and I've read plenty, I'm not part of their domain. But Karen Delaney, Oak Ridge's HOA president, decided otherwise. I met her on the 3rd day after moving in. I was outside, digging post holes for a new fence, sweat soaking through the back of my shirt, when she marched up the gravel drive in white heels, clipboard in hand. Her platinum hair didn't move in the breeze, and her expression suggested she'd smelled something unpleasant, probably freedom. "You'll need to take that down," she said, pointing at the half-finished fence like it was radioactive. I set down my post hole digger and turned to face her. "Excuse me, your fencing design doesn't comply with Oak Ridge's visual uniformity standards. The community bylaws require board approval before changes are made to any visible property features." I stared at her, confused. "I'm not in your community." She blinked, as if I'd said gravity was optional. "You're within proximity. Section 8C of our covenants covers adjacency regulations. All visible properties must adhere to approved aesthetic guidelines." "It's not how jurisdiction works," Karen sniffed. "That's how Oak Ridge works." She turned and walked off without another word. I watched her go, unsure whether to laugh or call the sheriff. I chose neither, at least not yet. Over the next few weeks, I began to understand just how far Karen's control extended, or rather, how far she believed it should. A letter arrived in my mailbox, typed in all caps and printed on HOA letterhead, demanding payment of $1,142 in annual dues and late compliance penalties. No return address, no contact name, just a deadline. Then came the complaints. Noise violations for running power tools. After 6 p.m. trash violations for leaving a can at the end of my private drive overnight. An accusation that my unpainted barn visually disrupted the suburban harmony. I contacted the county. None of these claims held water. I wasn't on their grid, and the HOA had no authority over me still. Karen persisted. One morning I found a final warning zip-tied to my chicken coop. It stated that livestock of any kind were strictly prohibited under Oak Ridge. But I stood there holding the paper, listening to my rooster crow, wondering what kind of person makes it their mission to police land they don't own. The tipping point came the day a landscaper knocked on my door, looking for payment. "Said you ordered perimeter hedges," he told me, flipping through his order sheet. Karen Delaney approved it. She said it was required. I looked at the drawn plans. They included a hedge line on my side of the creek. I told him to cancel it, sent him on his way, then called my lawyer that same evening. A courier arrived with an official letter stamped by a local law firm. Karen, on behalf of the HOA, was suing me. The claims: non-compliance with HOA aesthetics, unauthorized livestock construction without community board approval, and the cherry on top, creating visual disharmony detrimental to the neighborhood's property values. I laughed when I first read it, but it wasn't funny. Litigation wasn't cheap, and Karen wasn't just trying to find me. She wanted a court order to force me into HOA compliance and an injunction to prohibit further development until the board reviewed and approved my home. It was absurd, but it was real. I looked out my window that night, across the creek toward the perfect lawns and identical roofs of Oak Ridge Estates. Somewhere behind those hedges, Karen Delaney was probably sipping herbal tea, confident that her HOA would crush the outsider who dared challenge her illusion of authority. But she'd made a mistake. She assumed I was just another homeowner. She didn't know who she was messing with, and she sure didn't know what I was about to bring to court. The first rule of surviving an HOA war is to never underestimate your enemy's pettiness. Karen Delaney didn't just want to win in court. She wanted to bury me under paperwork, stress, and humiliation. And I quickly realized she wasn't acting alone. The week after I received the lawsuit, I noticed strange activity near the property line. A man in a reflective vest appeared in the brush behind my barn, snapping photos with a long-lens camera. When I confronted him, he muttered something about visual code enforcement and fled through the woods before I could get a name. A few days later, an HOA board member, Rita I think, appeared at my gate holding a clipboard and a forced smile. "Routine visual inspection," she chirped through the bars. "We just need to verify compliance." "With what?" I asked. "I'm not part of your HOA." "Well, that's under review," she said, eyes darting like she was searching for an exit. I didn't open the gate. Instead, I installed cameras. The footage over the next 10 days confirmed my suspicions. At least 3 different people, all HOA volunteers, trespassed onto my land. One even snuck into my open garage and took photos of my workshop. That crossed the line. I filed a police report, but the officer on duty gave me the classic shrug. "Tough situation," he said. "HOA disputes are civil matters. Just stay calm and let the courts figure it out." I wasn't looking for a fight, but I also wasn't going to sit back and let Karen steamroll me. If she wanted to drag me into court, then I was going in fully loaded. I hired a land surveyor, not just any surveyor, a retired military cartographer, named Dale Foster, who treated boundary lines like sacred scripture. We walked the entire perimeter of my property. Dale produced two things: a stamped survey map and an official letter confirming, in meticulous detail, that my land was never and had never been under Oak Ridge HOA's jurisdiction. I wasn't surprised, but I needed more. I spent evenings digging through public records, Oak Ridge HOA's original filings, zoning maps, developer agreements from 25 years ago. That's when I found it. My land was part of a completely separate development project, built by a different contractor, years before Oak Ridge even existed. There was no legal overlap, no shared easements, nothing. Karen's entire case was built on fiction, and yet she persisted. Her attorney, a twitchy young man named Paul Simmons, emailed me a proposed settlement offer 2 days before our first hearing. It was laughable: $5,000 in back HOA dues, mandatory landscaping changes, and a signed agreement to comply with future regulations. The kicker: I'd have to allow monthly inspections. I declined. Instead, I kept digging. The deeper I went, the messier it got for Karen. I submitted a Freedom of Information request for HOA expenditures. It took some time, but the records that came back were gold. Line after line showed reimbursements for beautification projects, all on or near Karen's personal property. A $3,800 patio expansion, $1,200 for security upgrades that matched the cameras I'd seen on her garage, all paid for by member dues, all rubber stamped by her own board. I organized the evidence into a binder, the size of a cinder block: photos, signatures, bank statements, every page legal dynamite. But I knew evidence wasn't enough. I needed context. I needed to show the court the pattern, the way she used her position not to protect the neighborhood, but to control it. So I contacted a few Oak Ridge residents. Most were too scared to talk, but one man, George Lindell, a soft-spoken retired teacher, invited me to his home. His voice trembled as he described Karen fining him $500 for planting a native pollinator garden instead of approved roses. She made him tear it out. Another woman, recently widowed, was forced to repaint her shutters twice because Karen didn't like the shade of green. When she couldn't afford the second repaint, the HOA placed a lien on her home. I recorded their statements, documented everything. By the time our court date arrived, I had a portfolio that didn't just prove I was outside the HOA, it proved that Karen was a tyrant in a cardigan still. She walked into that courtroom like a queen entering a throne room. I walked in with a briefcase full of receipts and a quiet smile. The courtroom buzzed like a hive when I walked in, briefcase in hand. Karen Delaney was already seated, flanked by her lawyer and 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd dressed for a parade, not a legal hearing. Karen wore a deep navy suit, her hair pulled into a tight bun, pearls gleaming under the fluorescence. She looked calm, confident, smug. She didn't glance my way. She didn't have to. In her mind, she'd already won. Case number 407B, the bailiff called Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association versus Mason Dawson. I took my seat. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s named Honorable Judge Leah Martinez, entered and surveyed the room like she could smell every lie before it left someone's mouth. I liked her already. Karen's attorney, Paul Simmons, stood first. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Your Honor," he began, "the Oak Ridge HOA brings this case against Mr. Dawson for repeated and ongoing violations of our neighborhood standards, refusal to comply with visual regulations, unauthorized livestock." Judge Martinez held up a hand. "Let's start at the beginning. Mr. Dawson, are you a member of the Oak Ridge HOA?" I stood. "No, Your Honor. My property lies outside the boundaries of Oak Ridge. I have brought a certified survey and legal documents to support that." Paul cut in quickly. "The HOA's charter includes a proximity clause that allows jurisdiction over adjoining properties that visually impact community value." The judge frowned. "You're saying the HOA governs non-member properties based on Paul stammered. "The charter's language, I've reviewed it," the judge said flatly. "Nothing in this clause gives legal authority beyond registered boundaries." Karen stiffened. Paul's ears turned red. Still, she leaned forward in her chair, trying to steer the room through sheer presence. "With respect, Your Honor, Mr. Dawson's property directly affects the value of our homes, his workshop, his fencing, his barn animals. I will remind you this is a court of law," the judge snapped, "not a neighborhood coffee clutch. You will wait your turn." Karen's mouth snapped shut, though her jaw twitched. I approached the bench and handed the judge a thick binder labeled, highlighted, and tabbed. "This contains my official land survey, zoning documents, and evidence disproving Oak Ridge's jurisdiction over my land. Additionally, it includes photographic and financial records documenting targeted harassment and misuse of HOA authority." Judge Martinez opened it. "This is extensive." I came prepared. She flipped to one page. "This ... shows HOA funds paid to a contractor linked to Ms. Delaney." "Yes, Your Honor. She used community dues to renovate her personal property. I've included the vendor registrations, payment receipts, and architectural approval forms she signed for herself." The room went still. Karen's face turned the color of chalk. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She brushed him off, lips pursed into a razor-thin line. The judge set the binder aside and steepled her fingers. Ms. Delaney, is this true? Karen straightened. All improvements were for community safety and beautification to your private deck. Karen blinked. To the surveillance system installed only on your property. Silence. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat, but inside, I could feel the momentum shift. All that work, the records, the statements, the quiet nights organizing every page, it was paying off. The judge continued. In light of this, I find the HOA's claim baseless. Mr. Dawson owes no dues, and the Oak Ridge HOA has no authority over his land. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Paul slumped like someone had pulled his spine out. Karen, however, stood. You can't do this. He's destroying our community. He's making a mockery of everything we've built. I can do this, Judge Martinez said firmly, and I will. Furthermore, based on Mr. Dawson's documentation, I'm referring Oak Ridge Estates HOA for formal investigation into financial mismanagement and harassment. You may be contacted by the county. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The judge banged the gavel. I walked out of the courtroom in quiet triumph, briefcase in hand, as Karen remained frozen behind the defense table, her carefully constructed empire cracking in real time. But the story wasn't over, not for her and not for me, because the investigation was only beginning. Karen Delaney didn't show her face for days after the court ruling, not at the HOA office, not at her usual morning walks through the neighborhood, and definitely not at the town council meeting where her name came up during public comments 3 times. But silence, in Karen's case, didn't mean surrender. It meant scheming. Just a week after her lawsuit was thrown out, I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a printed notice from the Oak HOA declaring their intent to appeal the court's dismissal. The text was riddled with legal jargon and threats of continued oversight actions. But the message was clear. Karen wasn't letting go. What she didn't realize was that the court's ruling hadn't just closed a door, it had blown the entire house off its hinges. The county's Department of Community Oversight launched a formal audit of Oak Ridge's finances, prompted by the judge's referral and backed by the evidence I submitted. Residents received questionnaires. Former board members were subpoenaed. The HOA's treasurer, an elderly man named Hugh, who always looked vaguely terrified, resigned immediately. 2 weeks later, a notice was posted to the community bulletin. Emergency HOA meeting attendance required. I went. I wasn't required to own, but I figured it was only right to watch the truth unfold with the people who'd been affected the most. The meeting hall buzzed with tension. Neighbors whispered in small clusters, some glancing toward Karen as she stood stiffly near the front, arms crossed, mouth locked in a grim line. She looked 10 years older than she had in court. George Lindell was there, sitting beside the widow Karen had tried to bankrupt over shutter paint. They both nodded at me when I entered. The new interim chair, Melissa Hahn, a no-nonsense accountant who'd clearly had enough of Karen's reign, opened the meeting with a microphone and a folder full of receipts. We've reviewed the expenditures from the past 4 years, she announced, voice firm, and the findings are ... concerning. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Thousands of dollars spent on unauthorized personal property upgrades, falsified contractor bids, reimbursements approved without board majority votes. We've submitted everything to the county. At this point, further action is out of our hands. Karen spoke up for the first time. This is a witch hunt. I did what I had to do to keep property values up. You think homes sell themselves? You want to let him, she pointed at me, turn our neighborhood into a barnyard? Melissa didn't flinch. He doesn't live in Oak Ridge, and even if he did, that wouldn't give you the right to use other people's money to build your own fortress. Karen's face flushed red. You're all ungrateful. I gave this neighborhood its reputation. I protected it. No, George said softly from the back. You ruled it. For a moment, no one spoke. And then, almost like a ripple through water, people began to clap. Karen stormed out, heels echoing off the linoleum floor. The door slammed shut behind her. 3 months later, the county concluded its investigation. Karen was found liable for misappropriation of HOA funds totaling over $24,000. Civil charges were filed. Oak Ridge residents voted to permanently dissolve her position and restructure the board's authority. As for me, I went back to building motorcycles in peace. My hens roamed freely across the yard, and my barn got a fresh coat of paint bright red, just to be visible. I hung the court ruling in my workshop, framed in walnut. Below it, I added one of Karen's early letters, the one where she demanded dues and promised swift legal consequences if I didn't comply. I call it my freedom war. Sometimes neighbors from Oak Ridge stop by, no longer as adversaries but as guests. They shake my hand. Some bring fresh bread, eggs, even invitations to community events this time. Without strings. I usually smile and accept, but I keep my fence up. Not to shut people out. To remind them where the line is, because if this saga taught me anything, it's that boundaries matter. Legal ones, personal ones. and especially the ones that keep power-hungry Karens where they belong, far, far away from other people's lives. Don't when they forget. I've got a court-certified reminder hanging right on the wall.